Are you done?
Yes, sir.
All rise. You're entering.
There are juries in courtroom seated. Defendant and counsel present, please be seated. Good morning, everyone. We're ready to resume. Thank you again for your patience and cooperation. My standard question is, by chance, was anybody exposed to anything at all, in any way, shape, or form, simply about this case simply last night? See no show of hands. All right, I'll ask the state to please call this next witness.
The state calls Detective Henry Duran. Stand right here,
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you give in this cause to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Right this way, sir.
Sir, please tell us your full name and then spell both first and last.
My name is Melvin Henry Duran, MELVIN HNRY DURAN.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, please the court, counsel. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you employed, Mr. Duran?
I'm employed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
And what do you do with the Buccaneers?
I'm the Director of Team Security.
Were you previously employed by the City of Tampa as a police department officer?
Yes.
All right. And how long were you employed by the Tampa Police Department?
I served 30 years with the Tampa Police Department, 27 as a detective, and 20 investigating homicides.
Okay, so for 20 years you were in the homicide unit.
That's correct.
When did you retire from the Tampa Police Department?
September of 2011.
Okay. So in June of 2010, you were employed by the City of Tampa as a police department officer?
That is correct. I was assigned to major crimes homicide.
I'll call your attention to June 29. Let me ask you this. When you were employed as a Tampa Police Department homicide detective, were you certified by the state of Florida as a law enforcement officer?
Yes.
And state certification as a law enforcement officer, does that include attending a police academy?
Yes.
And continuing yearly qualifications of certain types?
That is correct.
Does that include defensive tactics and firearms training?
Correct.
I'm going to call your attention to the date of June 29, 2010. Did you have occasion on that date to respond to a homicide scene on 23rd Avenue and 50th Street?
Yes.
When you arrived there, were there other officers and detectives on the scene?
Yes.
And at that time, who was the sergeant of the homicide unit?
At that time, it was Sergeant Jimmy Hinkle.
And did he respond to the scene?
Yes, he did.
And at some point, did representatives from the state attorney's office respond to the scene?
That is correct.
Were there crime scene technicians at the scene?
Yes.
And when you arrived, was the scene marked off with yellow crime scene tape?
That is correct.
When you arrived at the scene and you came into contact with these other detectives, were there other detectives from the homicide division there?
Yes.
Did you all have discussions about the extent of the investigation at that point and what you knew about the case?
That is correct. That included talking to the first officers on scene, emergency personnel, and the known information we had, or they shared with us.
Were you advised of evidence that had been found inside of Officer Curtis's patrol car?
Yes.
Including information off of his in-car mounted computer?
That is correct.
And also the L3 video system within his car?
Yes.
So you were privy to that information once you got to the scene?
Yes.
Were you assigned some role in this investigation?
Yes.
And what role was that?
I was assigned as the lead investigator.
I'm going to show you states, may I approach the witness,
Yes,
Judge?
sir. Yes, sir.
States B, do you recognize that?
That is correct. I do. It's a CD with has the Tampa Police Department case number in reference to the COCAB Curtis investigation, and has my handwriting where I wrote on there, release to Assistant State Attorney Scott Harmon on January 21st, 2011. Has my signature as well as my sergeant's.
Okay. And does this CD, it contains the video from the dash cam recording system in Officer Curtis's car?
Yes.
All right. And when a case is investigated by the City of Tampa Police Department, is there a case number assigned?
That is correct.
And that's the number you spoke about that's on the disc?
Correct. 10-383715.
And have you viewed that video?
Many times.
Okay. And have you become, would it be fair to say, very familiar with that video?
Very familiar.
Familiar with, are you familiar or have you become familiar with the video images on that video recording?
Yes.
Have you become familiar with the audio that's on that recording?
Yes.
And in your investigation, were there times where you watched and listened to that video over and over and over?
I watched and listened to it multiple times. I broke down the dialogue, every word that's spoken. I reviewed every frame. We had it broken down, so yeah.
Okay. On June 30th of 2010, this would be the day after the homicides of Officers Curtis and COCAB, did you attend their autopsies at the medical examiner's office?
Yes.
And at that time, was the medical examiner's office was located up near the University of South Florida?
That is correct.
And was there another detective with you at the autopsies?
Correct. I had assigned Detective Brent Holder to the autopsy, and I went with him. So we were both present during the autopsies of both officers.
Okay. And was there a crime scene technician from the Tampa Police Department also present?
Correct.
Was that crime scene technician tasked with the, or requested to photograph the autopsy and the condition of the victims during the autopsy?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Judge?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to show you it's been marked as states F. This is a composite of 1 through 23, so 23 photographs. Have you previously seen these photographs?
Yes.
And Mr. Duran, do the photographs accurately depict the conditions of Officers David Curtis and Officer Jeffrey COCAB's bodies as they appeared at the autopsy?
Yes.
And also, do the photographs depict projectiles recovered from their bodies?
Yes.
Your Honor, attendant states out a composite of 1 through 23 photographs.
No objection, Your Honor.
1 through 23, F1 through 23 will be received.
Now, I just asked you about photographs of projectiles that were recovered from Officer Curtis and Officer COCAB's bodies. Were those projectiles placed into smaller envelopes by the medical examiner?
That is correct. I was present when they were removed, packaged, sealed, and Detective Holder and I took custody of those 2 projectiles.
May I approach the witness,
Yes,
Judge?
yes, sir.
I'm showing you what's been marked as states G1 and G2.
Okay.
Do you recognize these envelopes?
Yes, these are the outer envelopes. These would have been how they were submitted to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement
Okay.
for firearms, to the firearms section.
Have you previously seen the smaller envelopes contained within these 2 exhibits?
Yes,
Okay. And the states G1 contain spent projectiles from Officer Curtis's body?
yes,
And does states G2 contain spent projectiles recovered from Officer Kokab's body?
yes.
Your Honor, I tender states G1 and G2.
No objection, Your Honor.
To be received.
Were there swabs taken of both Officer Curtis and Officer Kokab's bodies for the collection of DNA?
Correct. Buccal swabs were taken from both officers.
Okay. And how was that performed?
It's performed basically by placing a Q-tip inside the mouth and obtaining a sample.
Okay, so that would be a sample of the skin cells within the inside of their mouth?
That is correct.
And is that commonly called buccal swabs?
That's correct.
And do they come in an envelope, a sealed envelope, where you have to open the envelope and remove a small swab that looks kind of like a Q-tip?
That's basically a sterile Q-tip, correct.
Okay. And was that done with the person who was doing it was holding them wearing gloves?
Yes.
Okay. And were those swabs also given to you or Detective Holder?
Yes.
And were fingernail clippings collected from both victims by the medical examiner's office?
That is correct.
And were those also provided to the Tampa Police Department?
Yes.
And were there what are known as or called blood stain cards prepared from the blood from both Officer Curtis's body and Officer Kokab's body?
Yes.
And is that basically a process where a small card is, blood is placed on that card and it's allowed to dry to give a DNA sample?
That is correct.
And were those also collected by the Tampa Police Department?
Yes.
Mr. Duran, did your investigation reveal that both Officer Kokab and Officer Curtis were both duly sworn and state-certified law enforcement officers?
Yes.
And that they were both up to date on their firearms qualification training and their defensive tactics training?
Yes.
And in firearms and defensive tactics training, are officers trained in how to defend themselves physically and also how to defend themselves with their firearms?
That is correct.
Now, at some point across the street from the scene of the murders, was there a command post that was established? And I'm going to show you states V to help you visualize this.
Yes, I'm very familiar with it, and that accurately depicts the area of the command post.
And the command, this being the incident scene over here, where
Right.
was the command post?
The incident scene would be on the west road side of 50th. The command post was directly across the street, on the east road side of East 50th Street in that large parking lot area.
Okay, so basically underneath where the label incident scene is on this board?
That is correct.
And did you on that morning and several times over the next couple of days visit that command center?
Yes.
Later in the morning of the homicides, going back to June 29th of 2010, did it come to your attention that Courtney Brantley and the Toyota Camry had been located at an apartment complex several miles south of the crime scene?
Yes.
An apartment complex approximately 3 miles south of the crime scene.
Correct. Bristol Bay.
And Was Miss Brantley escorted to the Tampa Police Department?
Yes.
And would that be the Tampa Police Department headquarters?
Be headquarters in downtown Tampa, yes.
What's the physical address?
411 North Tampa Street.
And was she escorted to a section of the Tampa Police Department?
Excuse me, 411 North Franklin Street. Our old building was on Tampa.
Was she escorted to an area within the Tampa Police Department headquarters?
Yes, she was brought to me up on the 8th floor, basically the homicide squadron.
Okay. And was there an interview room there at that time established there?
Yes.
And did you participate in an interview with her?
Yes, I did.
And did Detective Kevin Durkin also participate in that interview?
Yes, he did.
And is Detective Durkin also now retired from the Tampa Police Department?
Yes, he is.
And did you work with him for several years in the homicide unit?
Yes.
Okay. So he was also a veteran, experienced homicide detective?
Yes.
And was there maybe one or two other homicide detectives involved in that interview with Miss Brantley?
That is correct. Detective Sandell came in at one point.
Okay. How long did that interview with Miss Brantley last?
Between 6.5 and 7 hours.
And during that interview, did both yourself, Detective Durkin, and Detective Sandell ask her who the passenger in the front seat of the Camry was during the traffic stop that led to the murder of the detectives?
Coach Bench.
I'm sorry. Mr. Duran did, I keep wanting to call you detective out of habit. Mr. Duran, did you and the other detectives ask Ms. Brantley during this interview to identify the front seat passenger in the Toyota Camry during the stop by Officer Curtis?
Yes.
And did she ever identify him?
No.
And how long did this interview last for?
Approximately 6.5 hours.
And was she asked that question more than once?
Objection, Your Honor.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Ask another question, please.
During that interview, those 7 hours, did you become familiar with Ms. Brantley's voice?
Very much so.
Did she respond to other questions posed to her?
Yes.
And you've indicated your familiarity with States B, the dash cam video. Could you hear the female driver as the female driver was responding to questions from Officer Curtis and discussing things with him in the video?
Yes.
Okay. And did you recognize the voice of the female driver?
Yes.
And who was the female driver?
Objection, Your Honor. Any reproach?
Coach Bench. Yes, sir.
Previously, did you recognize the voice of the driver of the Toyota Camry that had been stopped by Officer Curtis in that dash cam video?
Yes.
And who was it?
That voice was of the female driver, Courtney Nicole Brantley.
Did you at some later time in the investigation come into contact with an individual named Alfred Thompson?
Yes.
Okay. And did you determine that Mr. Thompson is visible in the dash cam video?
Yes. During the recorded stop, after Officer Curtis has approached the vehicle and he's returned back to his car and he's sitting in his car, and the 2 occupants are in the Toyota Camry, you see a subject walking from south to north on the West Road side from 23rd, on the West Road side of North 50th Street, walking north.
Your Honor, can we approach?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Dorado, are you familiar with a state law enforcement agency known as the FDLE?
Yes, that's the acronym for Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
Okay. And is that a statewide law enforcement agency?
Yes, it is.
And do they have, I believe they're called special agents that work as investigators for that agency?
That is correct.
And do they also maintain, I believe, security for the governor and other state officials?
That is correct.
Do they, as part of their budget, do they maintain crime laboratories throughout the state of Florida?
Correct. And
All right. And in those crime laboratories, do they have DNA or biology sections
yes,
and firearms examination sections
yes,
that are staffed by firearms examiners and DNA analysts?
that is correct.
All right. And do they maintain a laboratory here in Tampa?
Yes.
And where is that located?
That's located on Lois, just south of Dr. Martin Luther King.
And does the Tampa Police Department's Homicide Investigations Unit, does it submit evidence to the Tampa lab of the FDLE?
Yes, we do.
Do you also sometimes outsource evidence to private laboratories, such as private DNA laboratories?
That is correct.
So that's not an uncommon occurrence.
No.
And was there evidence submitted in this case to both the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and also to a private DNA laboratory?
Yes.
All right. Were the projectiles stage G1 and G2, the projectiles and bullets taken from the officers' bodies, were those submitted to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for testing here in Tampa?
Yes.
You spoke earlier about some nail clippings that were taken from the victims' bodies at the medical examiner's office. Were those submitted to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for testing?
Yes.
The blood stain cards that were prepared from both Officer Curtis and Officer Kokav's blood, were those submitted to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Yes.
Were there swabs that had been taken from the Toyota Camry when it was processed that were submitted to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Yes. As far as the swab, may I approach the witness, Judge?
Yes, sir.
I'm showing you some marked that states X and states Q. And states Q, and I'm talking about, again, swabbings that were taken from the Toyota Camry. I'm showing you two that are contained within states Q. Were those submitted to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for testing?
Yes.
Were they also submitted to the DNA laboratories at a separate time for testing.
Yes.
And that's DNA Laboratories Incorporated, that's in Deerfield Beach, Florida?
DNA Labs International.
International, I'm sorry, in Deerfield Beach?
That is correct.
And that's down in Broward County in South Florida?
Yes.
Okay. States X, for these swabbings that were taken from the Toyota Camry, were they also submitted to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
Yes.
All right. On July 2nd, 2010, was the defendant arrested, Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Okay, and would that have been the Friday of the week of the deaths of the two officers?
That is correct.
And during the booking process, was Mr. Morris's height and weight recorded?
Yes.
And what was his height and his weight?
I believe it's 5'8", 160.
States T1.
Yes, sir.
T2 and 3. Tennessee,
Yeah, I don't think, did you already submit it?
May I approach the witness?
Yes, sir.
Detective, I'm going to show you what's been marked as T1. You recognize the photograph?
Correct.
Okay, and states T2 and T3.
Correct.
You recognize the photographs. What do they depict?
All three photographs depict Dontae Rashawn Morris as he appeared when he walked in, when I came into contact with him
That on the night of his arrest?
on the night of his arrest. These photographs were taken at my direction.
Okay, and that would have been July 2nd?
July 2nd of 2010.
So 4 days after the murders?
That is correct.
All right, with tender states T1, T2, and T3.
Counsel,
Without objection, Your Honor.
will be received.
Publishing states
Yes, sir.
T1, states T2, states T3. Detective, do you see Mr. Morris here in the courtroom?
Yes, I do.
Please point him out, describe an article of clothing.
He is the black male seated all the way to the right on the defense table. He has a white long sleeve shirt with no tie and long hair.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that that Mr. Duran has identified the defendant, Dontae Morris.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, I'm going to tender states D at this time as self-authenticating.
States what, I'm sorry?
D.
Counsel,
Without objection.
D will be received.
Approach the witness, showing you states D. Can you tell the jurors what this is?
Yes, this exhibit is a state of Florida birth certificate, which bears the name of Dontae Rashawn Morris, date of birth August 24th, 1985.
Okay. Publishing states D. Detective, you talked earlier about your familiarity with States B, the dash cam video. Did you hear the front seat passenger in that video identify himself as Dontae R. Morris
Yes, I did.
and spell his name?
That is correct.
Okay. Did the spelling match the spelling of Dontae Morris on this birth certificate?
Morris, Morris, Dontae, DontaeR.
Okay, R for middle initial.
Correct.
How about the date of birth? Does it match the date of birth given by the front seat passenger?
Yes, 8/24/1985, which would put him at 24 years old, which the right front passenger gives that date of birth and also goes further and says he's 24 years of age.
In September of 2010, did you obtain an order to take Mr. Morris's buccal swabs for DNA purposes?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and did you go out and meet with him and obtain a buccal swab from him?
Obtained, yes, multiple.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been marked as States W.
I'm sorry, what was the number?
W, as in whiskey. Do you recognize that?
Correct. This is the container we use after we've obtained the swab and put it in there. I have written, in my handwriting, it has a Dontae Morris. It has collected by Detective M.H. Duran. It has the date, time, and I marked this one swab, open parentheses, right,
Okay.
close parentheses.
Was this swab being submitted to the DNA Labs International in Deerfield Beach?
Yes.
Your Honor, I tender States W.
Without objection, Your Honor.
Will be received.
And later, were there other buccal swabs taken from the defendant and submitted to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement?
That is correct.
We're going to approach the witness, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Showing you States E, which has been previously identified as a section of a zipper that was taken off of a fence near the crime scene. You recognize that?
That is correct. It's my submission envelope with my handwriting on it. The date and time that I removed it from our property room, the Tampa Police Department property room, for submission to DNA Labs International.
Okay. So you submitted that to the DNA Labs International in Deerfield Beach?
That is correct.
Okay. Evidence, is that ready? If I could have Mr. Duran step down, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. You can put it on the table. Doesn't have to be real loud. Okay. You can just stand over there, Mr. Duran. I'm sorry, you can move this.
Counsel, you move it where you need to.
Thank you, sir.
Judge, can we approach?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.